So for chapter 8, the question is going to be which bond is more polar, which atom has the partial negative charge. So here I've already written these down. We have hydrogen and sulfur, and then nitrogen and phosphorus, and then we have boron and chlorine, and then phosphorus and iodine. So over here I've already written down the electronegativities of each one, and electronegativities do not have units attached to them, so these are just going to be the numbers. So we'll start off with these two right here. So the hydrogen and sulfur, we have the 2.1 and 2.5 electronegativities for these two, and then nitrogen is 3.0 and phosphorus is 2.1. So what we're going to do to determine which one is more polar is we're going to subtract one from the other. So here I've written down sulfur, and that's 2.5, and we're going to subtract hydrogen from it, so that's the 2.1. That gives us 0.4. And then here we're going to go ahead and do the same thing. We've got the 3.0 and we're going to subtract 2.1 from it, and that gives us 0.9. So if you look at the two numbers, 0.9 is obviously greater than 0.4, so that would show us that the nitrogen-phosphorus bond is going to be more polar than the hydrogen and sulfur. So down here we're going to figure out which one is has the more partial negative charge. And that would be the nitrogen, because if you look up here, that has a 3.0 electronegativity, which basically means it's pulling the electrons toward it more than the phosphorus is. So when we show that, we have the delta negative and then the delta positive. So and those are going to denote the partial negative and positive charges for each of these. But like I just mentioned a second ago, the nitrogen is actually pulling more electrons away from the phosphorus, and that gives this more negative charge, while the phosphorus has a little bit more of a positive charge. And then for the second over here, we have the boron, and then we have the chlorine, and then we have phosphorus and iodine. So the boron is going to be a 2.0 electronegativity, and then the chlorine is going to be 3.0, and then the phosphorus is going to be 2.1, and the iodine is going to be 2.5. So I've written down here basically the same thing we did just a minute ago. We're going to go ahead and put the 3.0 and then the subtract 2.0 from it, and that gives us 1.0. And then down here we've got the 2.5, and we're going to subtract 2.1 from it, and we've got 0.4. So if you look at these two numbers, the 1 is obviously bigger than 0.4, so the boron and chlorine is going to have a greater polarity than the phosphorus and iodine. And down here again we've written the delta symbols for these. So the boron is going to have a more positive partial charge than the chlorine. So the chlorine is going to be more negative, which is what we're actually looking for, the partial negative charge. Because again, the chlorine is actually pulling the electrons away from the boron. And that's it.